This slideshow is about introducing evidence, and there's some advanced techniques for attribution and integration of evidence. When I say attribution, I mean giving credit to the source of your information and bolstering your argument by giving credentials for your source. So you might say, according to Albert Marin, author of O Rats, and I would say that is an attribution for whatever quote you've got there. Similarly, integration means working a quotation from a source into your own sentence smoothly. So you're essentially having a dialogue tag like, according to Albert Marin, author of O Rats, quote. We are not going to have quote plopping, which means that we just have a quote from the text that's wall-to-wall quote. You have a period at the end of your sentence, and then you start a quotation, and it's a whole sentence, and you have end quotation marks, and then you go on to a new sentence of your own, and there's no sort of tag, or the quote isn't embedded in a sentence that you wrote. It just stands alone. We don't do that. You're familiar with the basic ways of attributing and integrating a quotation. You can say the author, like Albert Marin states, and then the quotation. This is just like a dialogue tag, and you have a comma after the word states and a capital letter to begin the quotation because the quotation is a sentence. Or you could say, according to Albert Marin, comma, and then you could have your quotation. In addition, if you want to beef up your attribution and give some indication to your reader that this is someone worth paying attention to because they have some level of expertise, you can add an appositive, which means a restatement, like Albert Marin, comma, author of O Rats, comma, and you can take out that author of O Rats and have Albert Marin states. If you put it in, you need commas on both sides of it. Or you could say, according to historian and author Albert Marin, comma. So you can add a little more information about them. So let's look at an example where maybe adding a dialogue tag like Marin states or according to Marin before the quote will make things a little awkward. We're going to use this yellow quotation here. Estimates vary, but worldwide, experts say, rats eat or destroy between 1/5 to 1/3 of the human food supply. If we just plunk Marin states in front of that, it's a little bit awkward because we have Marin states and then experts say, and a whole bunch of other short phrases with commas between them. Marin states, comma, estimates vary, comma, but worldwide, comma, experts say, comma, rats eat, destroy. That's just a little bit hard to read. So one thing we can do is take out the part that we don't really need. We can take out this part where it says estimates vary and just start. We can remove this part and we can just start with rats. Marin states rats eat or destroy between 1/5 to 1/3 of the human food supply. If we do that though, we need to change the lowercase r in rats to a capital R because this quotation is now a complete sentence. And we need to show that the original text, that we're sort of cutting off the sentence because the original text had lowercase. So we're going to put this capital in square brackets to show that we've changed the case. So we can do that. Another thing that we can do, because it was lowercase to begin with, is instead of using this dialogue tag form where we say Marin states, comma, we can use the phrase Marin states that rats eat. We've changed this from a dialogue tag to now just repurposing words from the text in our own sentence. There's no comma after that. And in this sentence construction, the rule is you use a lowercase letter in the first position in the quotation. So you have two choices. Change the case of the R and say Marin states, comma, or say Marin states that and leave the R lowercase. Let's look at another example that might give us some challenges. I'm using the highlighted part. Rat, says an expert chef, has a slightly musky taste that is not unpleasant. So Marin is quoting an expert himself. And then Marin goes on to say, those who have eaten rat prepared this way compare it to rabbit. So I've recopied, retyped what's highlighted at the upper right here. And I've highlighted the quotation marks in Marin's text in yellow. If I put the traditional Marin states and then I put this quote, I have a double quotation mark problem. So the first thing I do is I take all of the quotes from Marin that were double quotes and change them to single quotation marks. And then those are the yellow, those stay yellow. And then because I'm quoting Marin, I put what I'm quoting from Marin in red. Those are double quotation marks. So I have single quotation marks within double quotation marks. And now I also have this little bit weirdness where it says Marin states, and then over here says an expert. That just seems a little confusing. There's a lot of commas, a lot of phrases, it's broken up. This is perfectly correct. It's just a little awkward and hard to read. So we could change things around a bit. Another technique we could use is to paraphrase the Marin text and then to quote the expert as our own quote and cite Marin, like this. Some say rat tastes like rabbit. I'm paraphrasing those who have eaten it compare it to rabbit. I'm changing that to some say rat tastes like rabbit. And now an expert chef says, here's the expert chef's exact words. I don't want to change them from Marin. So I'm quoting that expert chef. I have my double quotes around it. And now I'm saying, I got this from Marin. When I have this name of the author in parentheses at the end, that means that was my source for this quotation or for this fact or for this piece of evidence, whatever it is. I certainly need to have somewhere either said who Marin was at an earlier point in the text or have a bibliography that lists Marin and the title of the article. But if I've got one of those, I can just put the last name of the author here in parentheses at the end. If you're on a text set kind of argument, like on the SBAR or in a history class, you often can just put source 1 or source 2 here. I'll show you that in a minute. Note when you use this parenthetical source that the punctuation from the quotation is moved from inside the quotation marks to after the parentheses that have the source. Right, so the period goes at the very end. Not able to mark this. The period goes at the very end after Marin, not after unpleasant. Here's another example that's similar to the last one, where Marin is quoting an expert, and there's a dialogue tag for the expert in the middle of the quotation, which can make it awkward to put Marin states, or according to Marin, in front of that whole quotation. So I'm going to ask you to pause and write down two or three possible ways of writing this quote in a more elegant way. And if you need to toggle back to the last screen or slide back to the last screen for some examples, do that. When you're finished, continue the video. Here's some ways of doing it. There are several others. Notice that in the first example, I used an ellipsis to take out the words according to one expert. And in the second one, I paraphrased the phrase one expert states, then I put the expert's words with the parenthetical at the end. Here's another example of how to cite one source who's citing another expert source. I was reading an article by Sarah McKibben called Wake Up Call in an education journal. And it was an article about what time school starts and how it should start later because teens need more sleep. And Ms. McKibben was citing a study by the National Sleep Foundation. There's a little footnote here that says number 1, and that corresponds to the number 1 on the orange alarm clock. So she's saying that the orange alarm clock information came from the National Sleep Foundation. And they're a more expert source on sleep than Ms. McKibben. So I want to make sure my reader knows that where the actual information came from. So I'm going to say, according to a study by the National Sleep Foundation, comma, teens need 8.5 to 9.25 hours of sleep each night. And then I'm going to put McKibben in parentheses because I got the information about the National Sleep Foundation findings from McKibben's article. And notice here again that even though I might have a period after the word night inside the quotation marks, because I have the parenthetical citation afterwards, I've put the period afterwards at the very end of my sentence. In many types of school writing, such as text set writing in language arts, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, and on DBQs or document-based questions in social studies, the sources are often numbered for you, and it's usually acceptable just to refer to them as source number 1 or source number 2, like these examples here. You can just say according to source 1, or use source 1 in parentheses afterwards as a citation instead of using the name of the article or the author. You do, though, if you're quoting someone from within the article, you want to make sure that you are using their credibility to bolster your argument, and then afterwards saying source 1, so we know where you got it from. You can get a copy of this notebook chart and paste it into your notebook if you want some samples that you can use as you move forward.